In this video, we are going to talk about foundationalism. Now, recall that foundationalism is one of the answers to the regress problem for justification. So, when we thought about justification, a very natural idea was this. If I am justified in believing something, that means that when you ask me why I believe it, I can give you some reasons. Right? And those reasons are further beliefs that show that the thing I'm justifying is likely to be true. So if I want to justify a belief, I give you some other beliefs that I have and show how those other beliefs support the belief I'm trying to justify. But we also noted that this only really works if those further beliefs are themselves justified. Right? I can't really justify a belief based on things I've just randomly guessed. And so it seems that in order to justify a belief, I need to use other beliefs that are also justified. But for them to be justified, I need other beliefs that are in turn justified, and so on and so forth. Right? And this is a problem maybe, something that we want to solve, and foundationalism is one of the answers. In particular, foundationalism is the answer that states that there are certain beliefs, there's a class of beliefs, that do not have to be justified through inference, that do not have to be justified by basing them on other beliefs. So there is a certain class of beliefs that is already sort of automatically justified maybe, or that is at least justified in some non-inferential way. And this class of beliefs, the non-inferentially justified beliefs, are the basis, the foundation on which we build the rest of our knowledge. So they are the input in the chains of justification, in the inferences that lead us to the other things that we believe. Okay, let us look in more detail at how foundationalism works. And what I'd like to do is I'd like to start by making a distinction between two types of foundationalism, which I'm going to call strong foundationalism and weak foundationalism. And these terms are used in the literature more or less as I'm going to use them right now, but also sometimes in slightly different ways, so keep that in mind. The way I'm going to define the terms is this. Strong foundationalism is the claim that the foundational beliefs, the ones that are non-inferentially justified, are beyond criticism. Right? You can't really be wrong about them. You can't really ask for further justification about them. They're just there. It doesn't make sense to try to give reasons for them. Okay, so strong foundationalism sees the foundation as really a foundation, right? I mean, you don't have to worry about it. Weak foundationalism, on the other hand, would say that although these foundational beliefs have a certain amount of justification in a non-inferential manner, nevertheless, they are up for criticism, and so they can be strengthened, given more justification, through, other beliefs, through inferences. I'm going to say a little bit more about weak foundationalism at the end of this video, but I want to focus on strong foundationalism first, just because it's clearer. It's a simpler theory, and it's a lot clearer how it differs from coherentism. But I'll return to weak foundationalism at the end of the video. Okay, so strong foundationalism is the claim that certain beliefs are non-inferentially justified in such a way that they are then beyond criticism and we really don't need to give any reasons in favor of them. Well, here's the question we need to ask. What kind of beliefs could those be? Right? And different strong foundationalists could give different answers. But there are at least two classes of answers that are very popular historically, also very popular now. So, what are these two classes of answers? Well, on the one hand, there might be supposed to be certain self-evident truths, right? Things that as soon as we think about them, we know that they are true. And asking for justification would just be perverse. I mean, you just immediately see that they're true, right? If you immediately see that they're true, it doesn't make sense to ask, well, why do you believe that it's true? No, I mean, if you understand it, if you check it out, if you see it, you know it. So that's one class of foundational beliefs. The other class that is often proposed as being foundational beliefs is experience or observation or perception, right? So I look around, I see things. I see that there's a table in front of me. All right, maybe that's a foundational belief, right? If somebody asks me, well, why do you believe that there's a table in front of you? You know, I don't have a further reason. I just saw it, right? That would be the basic idea, that there's something in the empirical, right? Something in experience, something in observation or perception that gives us these immediately justified beliefs. It is perception itself that justifies them, not some further belief. Okay, so these are two classes of purportedly or supposedly foundational beliefs. Let's think a little bit more about those self-evident truths first. And we might notice this kind of foundationalism, for instance, from the work of René Descartes. Right? When René Descartes starts writing his Meditations of First Philosophy, he is really interested in finding a foundation that is beyond criticism. Right? He really wants to find some truths that are self-evident, cannot be doubted. Right? That literally cannot be doubted. And the first thing he hits on, famously, is that he can't doubt the existence of this doubting intelligence. Right? He thinks. Right? He's there, he's thinking, he's doubting, he is, you know, he can't be wrong about that. And he exists, right? Which is more or less the same insight. He can't be wrong about that. Right? If I think, okay, why do I believe that I exist? I mean, what are the reasons I can give for that, for believing that I exist? Or what are the reasons I can give for believing that I think? I mean, I'm doing something that makes no sense, right? Or at least that's what Descartes would say. I'm doing something that makes no sense. As soon as you understand what this means, as soon as you sort of turn your mental attention to it, you see that it's true, right? It's true. There's no two ways about it. It's just true. So the cogito, this I think, that's a very famous example of a supposedly self-evident truth. Well, here are some other maybe supposedly self-evident truths. One could think that the truths of mathematics, or at least certain truths of mathematics, are self-evident, right? So maybe it's self-evident that 1 + 1 is 2, right? I mean, you just think about it, you see, okay, yeah, you know, 1 + 1 is 2. I see it. I mean, there's nothing further to be said. I mean, if somebody claims that, I don't know, something complicated, right? Somebody says, oh, the square of 12 is 144. I mean, that's not super complicated, but it's a little bit complicated, right? I mean, and you could say, why do you believe that, right? And he could do the calculation, or he could draw it out and you could count it together or something like that. Okay, maybe there we need a justification, but not for 1 + 1 is 2, right? Or for 2 is bigger than 1. I mean, if somebody says, why do you believe that 2 is bigger than 1, and seems really puzzled, then maybe he doesn't understand what these words mean. That's where I would start, right? Because it seems really implausible that somebody understands what the words mean and still doesn't see that 2 is bigger than 1. So, maybe mathematics has certain foundational truths. Or maybe logic has certain foundational truths, right? Maybe something like the law of non-contradiction. That if A is true, then the negation of A, not A, can't also be true. Right? Maybe that's something that is self-evident. And if somebody asks you, well, I don't know, why couldn't it be the case that I am a human being and I am not a human being? You're like, no, wait, I mean, maybe you don't understand how not works or how language works or something like that, but I mean, if something is one way, it can't also be sort of the opposite, like the negation of it can't also be true, right? I mean, that might seem to be just a self-evident truth. I believe Aristotle says something like somebody who doesn't accept the law of non-contradiction is no better than a vegetable. I don't know whether that's true, but I mean, what he suggests is basically that, I mean, this is central to what it is to think, right? You can't give up what is central to thinking. You can't cogently doubt the things that are central to thinking. Okay, so what about these self-evident truths? Does it work? a foundationalism based on self-evident truths? Well, there are two worries. The first worry is that, maybe it's not so clear that all of these truths are self-evident. I mean, there are people who have tried to build logics without the law of non-contradiction. I don't know. I mean, I kind of like the law of non-contradiction, but, it's at least something you could debate. And there are a lot more people who have worried about Descartes' cogito, right? About this I think. Kant wonders about the I. Nietzsche wonders about the I. Lots of philosophers have wondered about this I. I mean, what is this I? Descartes seems to think it's some kind of substance. Kant doesn't think it's a substance. Descartes thinks it's unified. Nietzsche doesn't think it's unified. I mean, he says, well, where the most you can say is that there's thinking going on. Where does this I come from? So, there are maybe worries, like in terms of content, about some of these suggestions. But let's suppose that you can get beyond that, right, and agree on certain things that are self-evident. Then it would seem that these self-evident truths, like the things that are really like so central to thinking that you could never doubt them or give them up, that they are a rather narrow basis for trying to get to other truths. I mean, if all I have is my own existence and like the laws of logic and maybe some mathematics, no way am I going to be able to infer from that any of the truths about the material world that I think I'm justified in believing. Right? Logic and mathematics is just not going to give me the insight that I hold a green pen right now. But I'm really justified in believing that I'm holding a green pen right now. So it seems that these self-evident truths, even if they do exist, and even if they can sort of play a basis in our thinking, can play the role of a basis for some of our thinking, they're just not enough. Right? They don't seem to have enough content. That's the problem. I mean, if they are about something, well, they seem to be about the nature of thinking itself, maybe, but they don't seem to really be about the contents of thought. And so they're never going to give us all the beliefs that we think that we have and are justified in having. So, at the very least, we cannot stop at these kinds of self-evident truths. So what the traditional rationalist philosophers in the 17th and 18th century try to do is they try to bring us to content through, well, basically always through God. Right? Descartes in the Meditations tries to, very soon after having the cogito, to prove the existence of God. And it's only the existence of God that's going to allow him to say at some point that the evidence of our sensations, that we are justified in believing the evidence of our senses, what we see and what we hear and so on. And if you take away sort of the proof of God, then you're never going to get there. Right? You get stuck at this very early level of thinking that isn't really about the external world at all. And something like, I mean, in a very different way, Spinoza, for instance, is also going to bring in God, like basically immediately in the ethics, in order to play something of the same role, right? I mean, without God, you're never going to get from these self-evident insights to like real truths about the world, contentful truths about the world. So, unless you think that works, rationalistic arguments for the existence of God, we need something more to make foundationalism sort of get off the ground. So almost everybody would think that we need something more to make foundationalism get off the ground, and almost everybody would agree that what it needs is experience, right? And the idea would be that experience, when I experience something, that's when I come to know certain things, come to justifiably believe certain things, non-inferentially, right? If I look around, and by looking around I find out that I have a green pen in my hand, or by looking around you find out that I have a green pen in my hand, you're not inferring that from anything else. You see it, right? Or maybe you hear me say it and you hear it, but it's through the senses that you come to know something. And so the foundationalists, what they would like to say, usually, is they would like to say something like, in sensation, in perception, we come to be justified in believing certain things in a non-inferential way. It is in having the sensation that we are justified in believing something. Not based on some kind of reasoning, but just the sensation gives it to us. Okay, now if you are a strong foundationalist, as I indicated earlier, if you're a strong foundationalist, so if you believe that, you know, the foundation has to be beyond criticism, there is still some questions here that you're going to have to answer. Because it would seem that usually observations are not beyond criticism, right? I take a look and I say, whoa, there's an elephant in the corridor. And somebody says, well, are you sure? I mean, did you look well? Couldn't it be something else, right? I mean, you don't have to immediately believe somebody's observation report, or for that matter, your own observation report, right? You see something, you think, no, that can't be true. And you check it again, and you check it maybe in different ways. So it seems that observations are not beyond criticism, right? They are not a rock-solid foundation. We might need to give reasons why people ought to believe our sensations, right? We might need to say, oh no, but it was like I saw it really well because there was a lot of light in the corridor and it was really big and in my face, and you know, I tell some kind of hysterical story about the elephant that I just saw there. So one thing that strong foundationalists have tended to do, historically at least, is they've tried to change or reinterpret the notion of observation in such a way that it really becomes rock solid and beyond criticism. And so what they would say is that, you know, my observation is not really I see a table or I see an elephant, which is only true if there really is an elephant or a table. But my observation is more something like, well, in the case of a table, I have a brown rectangular sense impression. Or, you know, in the case of an elephant, I have a grey elephant-shaped sense impression. Right? And even if there's no elephant, right, it's still, that was my experience, right? I had this greyish elephant-shaped experience. I can't be wrong about that. That's the idea. I can't be wrong about that. So maybe that's the foundation, right? Maybe the foundation is that kind of observation report in terms of how things seemed to me subjectively. Well, we'll talk about sensation a lot more, both in the next video and in a series of lectures later on when we talk about, you know, different theories about what perception is and how it connects us to the world. Here I just wanted to point out that in order to be a strong foundationalist, you have to have a pretty philosophical notion, one could say, a pretty internal notion of what sensation or experience is. Right? It's got to be something that you can't really be wrong about, that you don't really need to argue for. And so it's got to be something like really internal, like how things seem to you, something like that. And actually this too can be traced back to Descartes, who in the second meditation talks about like these ideas that we have in the mind, these sensory ideas that we have in the mind, and they're precisely this kind of stuff. They're sort of ideas divorced from any claims about external reality. So, last thing, I promised to come back to weak foundationalism, and I'm going to come back to weak foundationalism right now. A lot of weak foundationalists, and there are a lot of weak foundationalists, I think, in contemporary philosophy, a lot of weak foundationalists would like to say something like this. They would like to say something like, look, a sensation or experience, you know, it has some justification by itself, but of course, it can be sort of criticized if there are reasons to believe that it might be wrong, and then you can sort of bolster it, you can strengthen it by giving more reasons for it. And so, for instance, your sensation of an elephant, right, your experience of an elephant, you know, it has some justification, but of course there are also some worries because it doesn't really fit your other beliefs, right? It doesn't really fit the idea that there are no elephants in the corridor of your house. And they couldn't be there, and that they can't get up the stairs, and that anyway elephants don't live in the Netherlands, and so on and so forth. And so in order to really believe it, you need to give us some more reasons, or you need to have some more reasons, right, to really be justified. You really need to sort of think through whether there was really good light out there in the corridor, whether you took the time to carefully observe, whether you didn't take any hallucinogenic drugs, this morning, and so on and so forth. And so this kind of weak foundationalism would say, look, there is a certain amount of justification in observation, but, these observations also function like other beliefs, in the sense that we can have worries about them, that we can give reasons for them, that might make them more or less, justified, and so on and so forth. That's a kind of foundationalism that becomes pretty hard to distinguish from coherentism, because now suddenly these supposedly foundational beliefs are also justified, at least in part, because they form part of this network, right? Where I believe certain things because of other things I believe. And in fact, there are coherentists who claim that, although they are coherentists, nevertheless, like, observations should get some extra justification bonus. And then you are basically saying the same thing as this so-called weak foundationalist. So I think that there's a real space in the literature where foundationalists and coherentists come very close together and are building a little bit of something that looks a little bit like a hybrid theory, maybe. And then they have discussions about whether it's still foundationalism or whether it's coherentism, or, whether they say the same thing or say different things. So that's one thing to be on the lookout for if you want to delve into this more deeply. Okay, in the next video, we are going to think about experience, sensation, and foundationalism a little bit more, using the works of Wilfrid Sellars.